Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's watercolor painting tutorial, I will be showing you how to paint this loose watercolor landscape using a reference photo. A real-time extensive version of this painting with extra techniques and exercises is available on Skillshare. It is free for 1 month. The link is below. If you want to learn painting, I make quality content in acrylics and watercolors, so do subscribe if you haven't already. Would love for you to join the fam. Okay, so let's begin. Alright, so let's roughly sketch out this landscape to make the painting process easier. So try and simplify your sketch and only draw things that will help you in identifying shapes and color. So starting off with the mountains here, feel free to modify a few things as you please based on the shape that you're working with. I mean the painting, the paper size that you're working with. Here I'm just separating out the marshy land with the water. This will also help me to identify the different obvious colors. This picture was taken by me when I was traveling to Europe, and I just love the composition and the warmth that we get from this landscape, so I thought this would be a perfect reference pic for today's class. I did want to draw out this little house that we see towards the right, so use the reference as a guide to help you draw that out. Alright, and once you're done with the sketch phase, we will move on to painting. Like always, let's begin with the sky. I'm using deep ocean blue from the Arteza palette, but any light blue will work. Using a round brush, get a light pigmented version of the blue and dab your brush in places you see the blue color in the reference picture. It is very important to leave some white spaces or gaps open to act as clouds. So taking a bit of indigo blue now, I'm getting it in places I see some grayish clouds to add the fluffiness of the clouds and to give it a three-dimensional look. To make any edge softer, just go over that edge with your brush and pull out that color. Okay, so I'm starting with a simple flat wash to the mountains first by using sunburst yellow. Just cover the entire area up, but also leaving some white spaces open. I'm adding some yellow ochre and burnt umber, which is a brown, to add to some of the shadow areas we see on the mountains. While the painting is still wet, I'm taking a darker brown called sepia brown, I believe, and I'm building on the shadow a bit. I decided to leave the mountains as is for now. We will come back to it later once it dries, but this is a good initial base. Let's move on now to the base layers of the land. So taking the most dominant color that I see, which is this sunburst yellow, I'm laying a flat wash to that. Mixing in a little bit of yellow ochre to get this muddy brown color for the section to the right. Adding some yellow ochre and burnt sienna and adding that to the shadow areas. These are just initial base layers. We will be building up on these colors a bit more. Mixing some yellow ochre and sunburst yellow again for the rock in the front and to the right side. I wanted to fill up some of those green bits we see in the reference, so going in with spring green and sunburst yellow and a bit of olive green to cover up those areas of light greens that we see in the reference. All in all, keeping mindful of leaving some white gaps open. Also be sure to hold your brush from the back of the handle to create more loose and effortless brush marks rather than more controlled. I see some of the green sort of land and bushes and trees around the house and in the back of the house too, so I'm just kind of loosely adding those marks right now. Alright, so before we move any further with details, let's finish up the base layer of the water sections. So I'm taking the same color we used for the sky, in my case it's called Deep Ocean Blue, and adding a very light wash first. Okay, now let's go back to the mountains and build up on those layers. My layers underneath have dried up, so I'm working on this wet on dry. Going back in with sunburst yellow to bring out that beautiful sunlight that's falling onto the mountains towards the central left. Okay, great. Now moving on to the shadows of the mountains and bringing out those layers a bit more. So I'm using a dark gray and brown for this and adding that to the right side, keeping in mind not to cover up all the existing layers and also leaving the white gaps open. Also getting some impressions of faraway trees at the bottom here. Cleaning that edge a bit and blending that color downward, which is also giving color to the bridge. Here I'm just getting the roof of the house down, keeping the entire house fairly light. Notice how I'm holding the brush here from the top of the handle, like you would a pen, because in this case I do need some control with all the tiny marks that I'm making. So when you want to keep it loose, hold it from the back, and do the opposite when you want your brush marks more controlled. Here I'm taking indigo and just building on the water a bit more to give it more dimension. Add that color to only a few places. Giving the water a little vertical brush stroke, so I'm just kind of going, instead of going sideways, make sure you go up and down to add in a bit of reflection and movement. It's very subtle, but you know, sometimes it can make a difference. Alright, so now in these last few layers, you will really see the painting come more to life, because now it's time to keep building on the layers little by little and adding some details which will define the landscape more. Let's work on the middle ground here, and I'm bringing out some of those colors a bit more. So going back in with sunburst yellow and brightening up those lighter sections. Similarly, adding some darker values to the areas where I noticed them on the reference pic, so towards the left, and then all the rocky bits as well. Now I'm really going dark and pulling out those darker layers more by adding black and brown. In watercolors, I often pull out the really dark darks at the very end. You always want to work light to dark in general, but you know, in acrylics it doesn't matter, right? Because you can layer light colors on darks, but not in watercolors. Using the very tip of the brush and dragging out some of those dark colors onto the water, so tiny little specks will give that impression of debris or marshy soil. Just using the splatter technique here with some dark brown to add some random specks of color for more interest to the foreground and just giving it tiny impressions of objects. So tapping on my brush will add some of that splatter. Pulling out my detailed thin brush now for some additional marks and just to add movement and interest. While the paint is still wet, I love mark making, and using my fingernails to do this can add a variety of just marks and movement. It can also add a very personal and intentional artist touch as well. You're basically etching into the paper, which I love leaving. Let's go ahead and give details to the bridge now. So I'm taking black and using the same thin detailing brush, and I'm simply making those vertical lines that we see in the reference, and that's it. Alright, let's go ahead and take off this tape now before we add our final last minute details. Here I'm taking in plain acrylic white. You can also use gouache if you have that. Just adding a few highlights to the overall painting. So a few little specks and dots will make it stand out and will provide interest to the landscape. And this completes our simple and loose watercolor landscape for today. And if you do try this out, don't forget to tag me over at Instagram or on my Facebook group. I love looking at your recreations. It always makes my day. Like mentioned, if you do want a real-time extended version, I do have it over at SKILLSHARE. The link is below. To shop my art, do visit my website where I sell my original landscapes and florals, as well as prints in all sizes and much more. To keep up with latest news, do follow me on Instagram where you can stay up to date with my new launches. Thank you once again and happy painting!